Manhattan, the Plaza Hotel, Grand Ballroom. Madison Harper adjusted her black cocktail dress for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The expensive fabric, bought with 3 credit card payments she couldn't really afford, clung to her nervous, sweaty skin as she watched New York's elite circle the ballroom like perfectly groomed sharks. "Relax, Mads. You belong here as much as any of these trust fund babies." Riley, her best friend and only ally in this sea of corporate networking, nudged her arm. "Remember, you're the new creative director at Summit Marketing. Confidence is everything." Madison took a deep breath. 3 months ago, she was unemployed, eating instant noodles, and crying over reality TV reruns. Now, thanks to her brilliant portfolio and a stroke of luck, she was running one of the most important divisions at the marketing agency that had just landed 3 Fortune 500 accounts. "Mads, isn't that Charlotte Preston?" Riley discreetly pointed toward a perfectly polished blonde woman in her 40s, approaching them with a smile that didn't reach her icy blue eyes. Darn it. Charlotte Preston, former creative director at Summit, fired when Madison was hired, known for her razor-sharp tongue and a network that included everyone from fashion magazine editors to tech billionaires. "Madison Harper," Charlotte approached like a heat-seeking missile. "What a surprise seeing you here. I must say you're different from what I expected." The tone was sweet, but the venom was unmistakable. Madison's stomach churned. "Charlotte, how lovely to see you." Madison forced a bright smile. "How are you doing?"
"Fantastic. I'm curious." Charlotte tilted her head like a cat about to play with a mouse. "Such a young woman taking on such an important position. Tell me, what's your secret? Because frankly, when I heard you were only 26 with 0 experience at major agencies, the words hung in the air like toxic smoke." Madison felt every conversation around them stop. Curious eyes turned their way. Madison's throat went dry. "Let me guess," Charlotte continued, raising her voice just enough to draw more attention. "Daddy knows someone, or perhaps you have other qualities that impress the partners." Madison's blood boiled. 3 years of graduate school, 5 years building her portfolio, countless sleepless nights creating campaigns that saved companies from bankruptcy. All of it being reduced to disgusting insinuations? "Actually," Madison heard her own voice, strangely steady, "my husband always says my talent speaks for itself." "Husband?" Madison froze. Why on earth had she said that? "Oh, how interesting." Charlotte's eyes gleamed like a predator scenting blood. "And who would this lucky husband be? Anyone we know?" The ballroom seemed to shrink around them. Madison felt sweat trickling down her spine. Her mind was completely blank. Madison looked desperately around the room, searching for an escape, when her eyes landed on an imposing figure across the ballroom. Ethan Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, heir to one of America's largest fortunes, known for being a ruthless workaholic who turned everything he touched to gold, the most coveted and untouchable man in New York City. And he was looking directly at her. "He's right there," Madison pointed toward Ethan, her voice coming out stronger than she felt. "Ethan Sterling, my husband." The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte followed Madison's gaze and went pale. Several people around them turned to look between Madison and the most powerful man in the room, and that was exactly when Ethan Sterling began walking toward them, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his lips. "I'm done for," Madison fought. Completely, utterly done for. But when Ethan stopped beside her, his arm slipped around her waist possessively, and he whispered in her ear with a voice that sent shivers down her entire spine. "Hello, sweetheart. Did you miss me?"
The warmth of Ethan's hand on Madison's waist felt like fire through the thin fabric of her dress. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and intoxicating that made her head spin, and feel the solid strength of his body pressed against her side. "Sorry I'm late, darling," Ethan continued, his deep voice carrying just the right amount of warmth for a loving husband. His thumb traced a small circle on her hip that made her knees weak. The board meeting ran over. Madison's brain had apparently stopped functioning. This was Ethan Sterling, the Ethan Sterling, the man whose face graced Forbes covers, who owned half of Manhattan's skyline, who could probably buy her entire apartment building without checking his bank balance. And he was playing along with her ridiculous lie. It's fine," she managed to stammer, acutely aware of how her voice trembled compared to his confident baritone. "Charlotte," Ethan's voice turned arctic as he acknowledged the older woman, "still spreading sunshine wherever you go, I see." Charlotte looked like she'd been struck by lightning. "Ethan, I had no idea you were... when did you get married?" Ethan's smile was razor sharp. "Madison and I prefer to keep our private life private, don't we, sweetheart?" He looked down at Madison with such convincing affection that for a moment she almost believed it herself. Those piercing gray eyes held secrets she couldn't read, but there was something in them, amusement maybe, that made her pulse race. "Yes," Madison found her voice, surprising herself with how steady it sounded. "We're very private people." "How romantic," Charlotte managed, her face cycling through several shades of red. "I suppose congratulations are in order." "Thank you," Ethan replied smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I promised my wife a dance." Before Madison could process what was happening, Ethan was guiding her toward the dance floor, his hand firmly planted on the small of her back. She could feel Charlotte's shocked stare burning into them, along with the curious gazes of half the ballroom. "What are you doing?" Madison hissed under her breath as they reached the edge of the dance floor. "Saving you from social suicide," Ethan murmured back, turning to face her and pulling her into his arms. "Did you seriously just claim to be married to me without having an exit strategy?" The orchestra was playing something slow and romantic. Ethan moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd been forced into cotillion classes as a child, leading her effortlessly across the polished marble floor. "I panicked," Madison whispered, trying not to notice how perfectly she fit against him. "She was being awful, and it slipped out." "It slipped out." Ethan's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "You accidentally claimed to be married to a complete stranger." "Not a complete stranger," Madison protested. "I've seen you on magazine covers." Ethan threw back his head and laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made something flutter in Madison's chest. "Well, that makes it so much better." "Look, I'm sorry I dragged you into this," Madison said, suddenly feeling mortified. "You can just, dump me publicly tomorrow or something. Blame irreconcilable differences and let Charlotte Preston tear you apart in the society pages." Ethan spun her gracefully, pulling her back against him. "I don't think so." Madison looked up at him in confusion. "Why would you care what happens to me?" For a moment, something flickered across Ethan's face, too quick for her to identify. Then his trademark arrogant smile was back. "Let's just say I have my reasons," he said cryptically. "Besides, Charlotte Preston has been gunning for my family's business for years. Watching her squirm was worth the price of admission." "So what happens now?" Madison asked, trying to ignore the way his fingers felt intertwined with hers. "Now?" Ethan's smile turned wicked. "Now we give them a show they'll never forget." Before Madison could ask what he meant, Ethan dipped her dramatically, his face inches from hers. The ballroom erupted in appreciative murmurs and a few scattered applause. "Smile, Mrs. Sterling," Ethan whispered in her ear as he pulled her back up.
"Your adoring husband is about to make you the most envied woman in New York." And as the music swelled around them, Madison realized she was in far deeper trouble than she'd ever imagined. Madison's phone buzzed like an angry hornet at 6:47 a.m., dragging her from dreams filled with gray eyes and dangerous smiles. She fumbled for the device, squinting at the screen through sleep-heavy eyelids. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and counting. "What the?" she mumbled, sitting up in her tiny studio apartment. The events of last night came flooding back like a tsunami of mortification. The gala, Charlotte Preston, Ethan Sterling. Oh no, oh no, no, no! Her phone rang again. Riley's name flashed on the screen. "Please tell me I'm having a nightmare," Madison groaned into the phone. "Honey, if this is a nightmare, then we're both stuck in it." Riley's voice was breathless with excitement. "Have you seen the photos?" "What photos?" "Madison, you're all over page 6 and Society Spotlight and Manhattan Elite." The headline on page 6 reads, "Mystery Wife. Billionaire bachelor Ethan Sterling's secret marriage revealed." There's a gorgeous shot of him dipping you on the dance floor that looks like something out of a romance novel. Madison's stomach dropped to her toes. She fumbled for her laptop, typing frantically as Riley continued babbling in the background. The photo credit says Manhattan's most eligible bachelor taken. Ethan Sterling and his stunning wife share an intimate moment at last night's Children's Hospital charity gala. Riley read breathlessly. "Mads, you look absolutely gorgeous. And the way he's looking at you. Holy moly, that man is smitten." The laptop screen loaded, and Madison's worst fears were confirmed. There she was, dramatic dip and all, looking for all the world like she was madly in love with Ethan Sterling. And he, goodness, the way the camera had caught his expression made her heart skip beats she couldn't afford to skip. "Riley, I'm dead," Madison whispered. "My career is over. When people find out this is fake..." "When people find out what's fake," Riley interrupted, "because right now all anyone knows is that Ethan Sterling has been secretly married to a gorgeous, successful creative director. Do you know how many women in this city would kill to be in your position right now?" Madison's other line beeped. "Unknown number. Riley, I have to go. Someone else is calling." "Madison Harper." The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is Jennifer Walsh from Sterling Enterprises. Mr. Sterling would like to meet with you this morning. Are you available at 10? Madison checked her clock. 7:15 a.m. Yes, I suppose so." "Excellent. The car will pick you up at 9:30. Please dress professionally. And, Miss Harper, Mr. Sterling suggests you avoid speaking to any reporters until after your meeting." The line went dead. Reporters. As if summoned by the thought, Madison's doorbell rang. Then again and again. She crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. 3 vans with television station logos were parked outside her building. A cluster of people with cameras and microphones stood on the sidewalk looking up at her windows. "This cannot be happening," she whispered. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news. "Congratulations on landing the biggest fish in NYC. Too bad it won't last when everyone finds out who you really are. See Charlotte Preston." Of course. Madison sank onto her tiny couch, head in her hands. What had started as a moment of panic-induced stupidity had somehow snowballed into a full-blown media circus. She was trapped in her own apartment, about to meet with a man who could destroy her career with a single phone call, and apparently had enemies plotting her downfall. Another text, this one from a number she didn't recognize. "Don't panic. Everything will be fine. Trust me. E." Despite everything, Madison felt a small smile tug at her lips. Even in text form, Ethan Sterling managed to sound arrogantly confident. Her phone rang again. This time it was her boss, David Chen from Summit Marketing. "Madison, I've been trying to reach you for an hour. Have you seen the news?" "Yes, David, This is incredible. Do you know what kind of publicity this brings to the agency?"
"We're getting calls from Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Town, and Country. Everyone wants to know about the woman who captured Ethan Sterling's heart. I'm moving the Peterson account presentation up. We need to strike while the iron is hot." Madison's head spun. "David, I need to tell you something later. Right now, I need you to embrace this moment. You're not just our creative director anymore, Madison. You're our secret weapon, the woman who married the most eligible bachelor in America." The line went dead, leaving Madison staring at her phone in disbelief. 2 hours later, she sat in the back of a sleek black town car, watching Manhattan blur past the tinted windows. She'd managed to sneak out the back of her building, evading the reporters, dressed in her best business suit and armed with nothing but false confidence and a rapidly growing sense of impending doom. The car pulled up to Sterling Enterprises' gleaming headquarters, a glass and steel monument to corporate power that stretched toward the clouds like a modern-day Tower of Babel. As she walked through the marble lobby, Madison caught sight of her reflection in the polished elevator doors. She looked pale, but determined, every inch the successful businesswoman she'd fought so hard to become. The elevator whisked her up 47 floors to the executive level, where Jennifer Walsh, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, was waiting with a practiced smile. "Ms. Harper, right this way." The walk to Ethan's office felt like a march to the gallows. Jennifer's heels clicked against the marble floor in a steady rhythm that matched Madison's racing heartbeat. They stopped before massive oak doors. Jennifer knocked twice and opened them without waiting for a response. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Harper is here." Madison stepped into the office and felt her breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Central Park, while the office itself was a study in understated power. Rich leather, polished wood, and subtle lighting that made everything look like a scene from a corporate thriller. And there, behind a desk that probably cost more than her annual rent, sat Ethan Sterling. He looked up from whatever he was reading, and those piercing gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees wobble. "Hello, wife," he said with a smile that was equal parts charming and dangerous. "We need to talk." Madison stood frozen in the doorway of Ethan Sterling's office, acutely aware that Jennifer Walsh had quietly disappeared, leaving them alone in what felt like a lion's den. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, and she found herself cataloging details to avoid meeting those penetrating gray eyes. The crystal paperweight on his desk that probably cost more than her monthly salary, the subtle scent of sandalwood and bergamot that filled the air, the way morning sunlight caught the sharp angles of his face. "Please sit," Ethan said finally, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from his desk. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man who held all the cards and knew it. Madison forced herself to move, her heels sinking slightly into the plush Persian rug. As she settled into the chair, she couldn't help but notice how the leather seemed to embrace her like a very expensive hug. Everything in this office whispered of power and wealth, from the original Picasso sketch on the wall to the way the desk was positioned to put visitors at a psychological disadvantage. "Coffee? Water?" Ethan asked, pressing a button on his desk phone. "Coffee would be great," Madison replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Black, please." "Jennifer, 2 coffees, black from Ms. Harper, the usual for me." He released the button and leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "You clean up well. Different look than last night." Madison glanced down at her navy blue suit, her interview suit, actually, the one she'd worn when she landed the job at Summit Marketing. "Well, I didn't exactly plan on becoming Manhattan's most talked-about fake wife when I got dressed yesterday." Ethan's lips quirked upward. "Fake wife. I like that. Direct. Honest. Refreshing qualities in my line of work." Jennifer appeared with a silver tray bearing 2 cups of coffee that smelled heavenly. Madison accepted hers gratefully, using the moment to compose herself. The coffee was perfect, rich, smooth, probably imported from some exclusive plantation she'd never heard of. "So," Madison said, setting her cup down carefully, on the side table, "I assume you called me here to discuss damage control. How exactly do we untangle this mess without destroying both our reputations?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled as he regarded her. "What if I told you I don't want to untangle it?" Madison blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me." Ethan stood and walked to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out toward Central Park. "What if I told you that this little charade of yours might be exactly what I need right now?" "I'd say you've lost your mind," Madison replied honestly. "This is insane, Ethan. We're strangers. We can't just pretend to be married because it's convenient." He turned back to her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "Can't we? People do it all the time in business. Mergers, partnerships, strategic alliances. This is just a different kind of contract." Madison set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "A contract?"
You want to make our fake marriage into some kind of business arrangement? Why not? Ethan moved back to his desk, but instead of sitting behind it, he perched on the edge, closer to her. Think about it, Madison. You're getting incredible publicity for your career. I saw the news this morning. Your agency is already capitalizing on this. You'll probably make partner within the year. And what do you get out of it? Madison asked suspiciously. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My board of directors has been pressuring me to settle down. They think a married CEO looks more stable, more trustworthy to investors. My grandfather left a clause in his will that gives the board additional leverage if I'm not married by my 35th birthday. When's your birthday? 3 months from now. Madison stared at him. So you're telling me that the great Ethan Sterling, master of the universe, is being bullied by his own board of directors? I'm telling you that sometimes even masters of the universe need strategic partnerships, he replied coolly. This could work for both of us, Madison. You get the career boost of a lifetime, and I get the board off my back. For how long? Madison found herself asking, even though part of her brain was screaming that this was the most ridiculous conversation she'd ever had. 6 months maybe, a year. Long enough for your career to solidify, and for me to prove to the board that I'm not going anywhere. Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping to that low, persuasive tone that probably closed million-dollar deals. I'm not talking about a real marriage, obviously. Separate apartments, separate lives. We just need to make a few public appearances together. Some charity galas, maybe a weekend in the Hamptons. Nothing too demanding. Madison stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. Central Park stretched out below them, peaceful and green, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in her mind. This is crazy. What about dating? What about, I don't know, falling in love with someone real? Are you in love with someone? Ethan asked. No, but neither am I. And frankly, I don't have time for romance. This arrangement would actually make my life simpler. Madison turned to him. What about Charlotte Preston? She's going to be watching us every move, waiting for us to slip up. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Let her watch. Charlotte's been trying to damage my family's reputation for years. Her ex-husband lost a lot of money in a deal with Sterling Enterprises 5 years ago, and she's been holding a grudge ever since. If anything, having to watch us be happily married will drive her crazy. You're enjoying this, Madison accused. Guilty as charged. Ethan stood and moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. But I'm also serious about the offer, Madison. This could be mutually beneficial, very beneficial. Define very beneficial. Ethan named a figure that made Madison's knees go weak. Monthly allowance to help with your new lifestyle,
Plus access to my personal stylist, makeup artist, and trainer. You'll need to look the part of Mrs. Sterling.
You want to pay me to be your fake wife?
I want to compensate you for your time and effort in maintaining this arrangement. Ethan corrected smoothly. Consider it a consulting fee.
Madison's mind raced. The money he was offering would pay off her student loans, her credit cards, and still leave enough for her to build a real savings account for the first time in her adult life. She could move out of her shoebox apartment, maybe even buy decent furniture. But the rational part of her brain was waving red flags. What about the emotional complications? What happens if one of us develops feelings? Something flickered across Ethan's face.
That won't be a problem.
How can you be so sure?
Because I don't do feelings, Madison. I do business. And this is business. He moved back to his desk and pulled out a folder. I've had my lawyers draft a preliminary agreement. Take a look.
Madison accepted the folder with trembling hands. The contract was surprisingly detailed, covering everything from public appearance requirements to social media guidelines to a termination clause that could be triggered by either party with 30 days' notice.
There's a confidentiality agreement included, Ethan explained. Neither of us can discuss the true nature of our arrangement with anyone. Ever.
What about Riley, my best friend?
Especially not your best friend. The fewer people who know, the better.
Ethan's expression softened slightly.
I know this is a lot to process. Take the weekend to think about it.
Madison looked up from the contract. And if I say no?
Then we have a very public, very messy divorce, and we both deal with the fallout. Ethan shrugged.
Your choice.
Madison closed the folder and stood. I need time to think.
Of course.
Ethan pressed the button on his phone.
Jennifer, please arrange for Madison to be taken home. Use the service entrance to avoid the reporters.
As if summoned by magic, Jennifer appeared in the doorway. Miss Harper, if you're ready. Madison started toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Ethan?
Yes.
Why me? You could have any woman in New York. Why go along with my ridiculous lie?
For a moment, Ethan's carefully controlled mask slipped, and she saw something raw and honest in his expression. Maybe because it didn't feel like a lie when I was holding you last night.
The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities and complications that made Madison's heart race. Think about it, Madison, Ethan said quietly. We could both get what we want, no strings attached. But as Jennifer led her from the office and toward the elevator, Madison couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan Sterling was exactly the kind of man who came with strings attached, whether he meant to or not. And the most terrifying part was that she was actually considering saying yes. Madison spent the entire weekend pacing her tiny studio apartment like a caged tiger. The Sterling Enterprises contract folder sitting on her coffee table like an unexploded bomb. She'd read through the agreement so many times she could probably recite it from memory, each clause more surreal than the last. Section 4.2, the parties agreed to maintain physical contact appropriate for a married couple during public appearances, including but not limited to hand-holding, brief kisses, and casual touching. Section 7.1, social media posts must reflect a loving, committed relationship. All posts featuring the other party must be approved in advance. Section 12.3. In the event that romantic feelings develop between the parties, the affected party must disclose such feelings immediately to avoid breach of contract. That last clause made her stomach twist every time she read it. What kind of person thought to include a no falling in love clause in a fake marriage contract? And more importantly, what kind of person was considering signing it? Her phone had been buzzing non-stop since Friday morning. Reporters, journalists, bloggers, everyone wanted the story of how she'd captured the heart of America's most eligible bachelor. She'd stopped answering calls from unknown numbers, but that didn't stop them from leaving voicemails. Madison, this is Sarah Chen from Vogue. We'd love to feature you in our upcoming Power Couples issue. Miss Harper, this is James Morrison from the New York Times Style section. We're doing a piece on New York's new power wives. Madison, this is Ashley from the Real Housewives of Manhattan. We'd love to have you as a guest on the show. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. She'd gone from complete anonymity to being the most talked about woman in New York in less than 72 hours. Sunday evening, as she sat in her pajamas, eating takeout Chinese food straight from the container, her doorbell rang. Madison froze, chopsticks halfway to her mouth. The reporters had finally given up their vigil yesterday, but she wasn't taking any chances. She crept to the peephole and nearly choked on her lo mein. Ethan Sterling stood in her hallway, looking ridiculously out of place in his expensive charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes. He was holding what appeared to be a bottle of wine and had somehow managed to look both casual and intimidating at the same time. Madison glanced down at her ratty NYU sweatshirt and polka dot pajama pants. Of course he would show up when she looked like a college student during finals week. She opened the door a crack, leaving the chain lock engaged. What are you doing here?
Good evening to you too, wife, Ethan said with that infuriating smirk. I brought wine and answers to questions you probably have about the contract. How did you get past the building security? I'm very persuasive. Are you going to let me in, or should we have this conversation in the hallway where Mrs. Chen from 4B can listen in?
Madison glanced toward Mrs. Chen's door and saw the woman's eye pressed to her own peephole. Great. She reluctantly unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. You couldn't have called first?
You haven't been answering your phone, Ethan pointed out, stepping into her apartment. I assumed you were avoiding me.
I was avoiding everyone, Madison muttered, closing the door behind him and watching in horror as he surveyed her tiny living space. The studio apartment that had seemed cozy and efficient when she'd rented it now felt like a shoebox in the presence of a man who probably had walk-in closets bigger than her entire home. Ethan's gaze moved from her unmade futon to the stack of dirty dishes in her sink to the pile of laundry she'd been meaning to fold for 3 days. If he was judging her living situation, he was polite enough not to show it. He said, "Nice place. Very minimalist. It's a dump." "But it's my dump and the rent is reasonable." She gestured toward the small round table that served as both dining room and office. "You can sit there, I guess. Fair warning, the chair wobbles."
Ethan set the wine bottle on the table and tested the chair cautiously before sitting. Madison remained standing, arms crossed, trying to project more confidence than she felt while wearing cartoon pandas on her feet.
"So," she said, "you brought wine and answers. Let's start with the answers."
Fair enough. Ethan loosened his tie slightly, the first crack in his perfectly polished armor she'd seen. "What do you want to know?"
Everything. Starting with why you really need a faked wife. Madison moved to lean against her kitchen counter, putting some distance between them. "And don't give me that board of directors story. I did some research this weekend. You own 60% of Sterling Enterprises. The board can pressure you all they want, but they can't actually remove you."
Ethan's eyebrows rose. "You've been busy."
"I'm not stupid, Ethan. If I'm going to sign my life away for 6 months, I want to know what I'm really getting into."
For a long moment, Ethan was quiet, his fingers drumming against the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, less controlled, more honest. "You're right. The board can't remove me, but they can make my life very difficult. They can vote down expansion plans, block acquisitions, refuse to approve new initiatives." He ran his hand through his dark hair, messing up its perfect styling. "My grandfather built Sterling Enterprises from nothing."
But he was also a traditionalist. He believed that a man wasn't truly mature until he had a wife and family to ground him. So the clause in his will is real, but not what you think. "If I'm not married by 35, my voting shares get reduced to 40%. The board gains control." Ethan's jaw tightened. Everything my grandfather built, everything I've worked for, could be dismantled by a group of old men who think quarterly profits matter more than long-term vision. Madison studied his face, seeing the genuine frustration there. "Why haven't you just found someone real? You're rich, successful, reasonably attractive." "Reasonably attractive?" Ethan interrupted with a raised eyebrow. "Don't fish for compliments," Madison shot back. "You know you're gorgeous. My point is, you could probably have your pick of women in this city. Why the fake marriage route?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Madison thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I've tried the real thing. It didn't end well." There was pain in his voice, old and carefully buried, but unmistakable. Madison felt her defensive stance soften slightly. "What happened?" "Her name was Caroline. We were together for 2 years, engaged for 6 months. I thought," he shook his head, "it doesn't matter what I thought. What matters is that she decided marrying a workaholic wasn't worth the money after all. She called off the engagement 3 days before the wedding." "Ethan, I'm sorry." "Don't be. She was right. I am a workaholic. I do put business before everything else. I'm not capable of the kind of relationship that leads to real marriage." He looked up at her, his gray eyes hard. "That's why this arrangement makes sense. No emotions, no expectations beyond what's written in the contract. We both get what we need without the messy complications of actual feelings." Madison felt something twist in her chest at his words. "That's a pretty cynical way to look at life." "It's a realistic way to look at life," Ethan corrected. "Romantic love is a luxury I can't afford. This is business, Madison. Clean, simple, mutually beneficial business." Madison moved to her tiny refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water, needing something to do with her hands. "And what if Charlotte Preston figures out it's fake? You said she has it out for your family." "Charlotte is a problem, but not an insurmountable one. She's bitter and vindictive, but she's not stupid. As long as we're convincing in public, she'll have to accept the situation." Ethan paused. "Although there is one thing I should mention." "What?" "She's been telling people that our marriage won't last 6 months. She's made it something of a public prediction." Madison nearly dropped her water bottle. "She what?" "Apparently, she's been holding court at every society event this weekend, explaining to anyone who will listen that you're obviously a gold digger who trapped me with pregnancy or blackmail, and that I'll come to my senses soon enough." "Pregnancy?" Madison's voice rose to a squeak. "Where did she get that idea?" "I have no clue, but it's gaining traction in certain circles. My assistant fielded 6 calls from society reporters yesterday asking for comment on your condition." Madison sank into the wobbling chair across from him, suddenly feeling exhausted. "This is getting more complicated by the minute, which is why I'm here." Ethan leaned forward, his expression intense. Madison, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. Half measures won't work against someone like Charlotte. We need to be completely committed to selling this relationship. What exactly does that mean? It means moving in together. Madison's head snapped up. Excuse me? Think about it. We're supposedly newlyweds who've been keeping our marriage secret. It would be bizarre if we maintained separate residences now that we're public. Ethan gestured around her small apartment. And no offense, but this place isn't exactly befitting Mrs. Sterling. I am not moving into your penthouse, Madison said firmly. I won't be some kept woman playing dress-up in your world. I'm not suggesting you become a kept woman. I'm suggesting we get a place together. Something that feels like home to both of us, not just an extension of my office. Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her a real estate listing. I've been looking at some options. This is a townhouse on the Upper East Side. 4 bedrooms, so we can each have our own space. Home office for you, private gym, roof deck. It's furnished, but not too masculine. Madison stared at the photos on his phone. The townhouse was gorgeous, elegant, but warm, with exposed brick walls and huge windows, and a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. It was the kind of place she dreamed of living in since she was a little girl playing house. Ethan, I can't afford half the rent on a place like this. You're not paying rent. It's part of the arrangement. He pocketed his phone. Madison, if we're going to convince people that this marriage is real, we need to live like it's real. That means sharing a home, attending events together, building a believable history. Building a history, couple stories, how we met, how I proposed, why we kept it secret. We need our stories to match if anyone asks. Ethan's business mode was back in full force. I've already told my assistant that we met when Sterling Enterprises hired Summit Marketing for a small project last year. Love at first sight, whirlwind romance, Vegas wedding that we kept quiet because we wanted to be sure before going public. Madison's head was spinning. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've thought of most things. The details we can work out as we go. Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her a real estate listing. I've been looking at some options. This is a townhouse on the Upper East Side. 4 bedrooms, so we can each have our own space. Home office for you, private gym, roof deck. It's furnished, but not too masculine. Madison stared at the photos on his phone. The townhouse was gorgeous, elegant, but warm, with exposed brick walls and huge windows, and a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. It was the kind of place she dreamed of living in since she was a little girl playing house. Ethan, I can't afford half the rent on a place like this. You're not paying rent. It's part of the arrangement. He pocketed his phone. Madison, if we're going to convince people that this marriage is real, we need to live like it's real. That means sharing a home, attending events together, building a believable history. Building a history, couple stories, how we met, how I proposed, why we kept it secret. We need our stories to match if anyone asks. Ethan's business mode was back in full force. I've already told my assistant that we met when Sterling Enterprises hired Summit Marketing for a small project last year. Love at first sight, whirlwind romance, Vegas wedding that we kept quiet because we wanted to be sure before going public. Madison's head was spinning. You thought of everything, haven't you? I've thought of most things. The details we can work out as we go. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand, his touch sending electricity up her arm. Madison, I know this is crazy. I know it's asking a lot, but it could work. We could both get everything we want. Looking into his eyes, Madison felt herself wavering. The rational part of her brain was screaming warnings, but another part, a part that had been ignored and practical for so long, was whispering about possibilities, financial security, career advancement, a beautiful home, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to figure out what was behind that carefully controlled facade Ethan wore like armor. If I say yes, she said slowly, when would this start? Immediately. There's a charity auction tomorrow night, the kind of event where we need to be seen together. My stylist could meet with you tomorrow afternoon, get you something appropriate to wear. And if I say no? Then we announce our divorce Tuesday morning, blame irreconcilable differences, and hope the media moves on to the next scandal quickly enough that neither of us suffers permanent damage. Madison pulled her hand away from his, needing to think clearly. I need guarantees. Written guarantees, such as, if this goes badly, if my reputation gets destroyed, you help me rebuild it. Job references, networking opportunities, whatever it takes. Madison's voice grew stronger as she spoke. And if you decide to end the arrangement early, I get 6 months of severance pay. Done. Ethan didn't hesitate. Anything else? Madison looked around her tiny apartment one more time. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Safe, simple.
Signing Ethan's contract meant giving up that safety, stepping into a world where everything was performance and calculation. But it also meant opportunity, real opportunity, not just to advance her career, but to experience a life she'd only ever dreamed about. "One more thing," she said quietly. "If I develop feelings for you, and I tell you about it per the contract terms, you can't use it against me. No mockery, no making me feel stupid for being human." Something flickered across Ethan's face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. "That goes both ways." "You won't develop feelings," Madison said with more confidence than she felt. "You just told me you don't do emotions." "No," Ethan agreed quietly. "I don't." But as he said it, his gaze lingered on her face in a way that made her pulse quicken. Madison stood up and walked to her coffee table, picking up the contract folder. She stared at it for a long moment, acutely aware of Ethan watching her every move. "If I sign this," she said without looking at him, "everything changes." "Everything already changed the moment you claimed to be my wife," Ethan replied. "This just makes it official." Madison took a deep breath, grabbed a pen from the stack of mail on her counter,
And before she could change her mind, signed her name on the dotted line. When she looked up, Ethan was smiling. Not his usual arrogant smirk, but something warmer and more genuine. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Sterling." 3 weeks into their arrangement, Madison was beginning to understand why people said money couldn't buy happiness, but it could certainly rent a very convincing version of it. She stood in the master bedroom of their Upper East Side townhouse, watching her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror as Sophia, Ethan's personal stylist, made final adjustments to her gown for tonight's museum gala. The emerald green silk hugged her curves perfectly, the color bringing out flecks of gold in her brown eyes that she'd never noticed before. "You look absolutely stunning, Mrs. Sterling," Sophia said, stepping back to admire her work. "Mr. Sterling won't be able to take his eyes off you." Madison tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the thought. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd become disturbingly good at pretending to be in love with Ethan Sterling. Too good, perhaps. What had started as carefully choreographed public appearances was beginning to feel dangerously natural. The transition to their shared life had been smoother than either of them had anticipated. The townhouse Ethan had chosen was perfect, elegant, but warm, with enough space for both of them to maintain their independence while creating the illusion of domestic bliss. Madison had her own office on the second floor, where she worked on summit marketing campaigns, while Ethan had converted the third floor into a home office that rivaled his corporate headquarters. But it was the small, unscripted moments that were becoming problematic. The way Ethan brought her coffee every morning, prepared exactly the way she liked it without her ever having to ask. The way they'd fallen into an easy routine of sharing breakfast while reading their respective sections of the newspaper. The way he'd started asking about her day when he came home from work and actually listening to her answers. Last week, she'd caught a stomach bug and spent 2 days laid up in bed feeling miserable and sorry for herself. Ethan had surprised her by canceling his meetings to work from home, checking on her every few hours with soup, tea, and an endless supply of terrible daytime television to keep her entertained. When she'd protested that he didn't need to take care of her, he'd simply said, "What kind of husband would I be if I didn't?" The word husband had sent an unwelcome thrill through her that she'd tried very hard to ignore. "Madison," Sophia's voice brought her back to the present. "Did you hear me? I asked if you wanted to wear the diamond earrings or the emerald ones." "Oh, sorry. The diamonds, I think," Madison said, shaking off her wandering thoughts. "They'll catch the light better for photos." Sophia nodded approvingly and fastened the exquisite diamond drops to Madison's ears. Each earring probably cost more than Madison's old annual salary, a fact that still made her slightly nauseous when she thought about it too long. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the townhouse, followed by Ethan's voice calling her name.
Madison's pulse quickened automatically, a Pavlovian response she'd developed to his presence that she tried very hard to ignore. "I'm upstairs," she called back, slipping into the Louboutin heels that still made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Footsteps on the hardwood stairs. Measured and confident, Madison found herself holding her breath as Ethan appeared in the doorway, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. His dark hair was slightly mused from the wind, and there was a stress line between his eyebrows that she'd learned to recognize over their weeks of cohabitation. "Rough day?" she asked, automatically moving toward him. It had become second nature, this dance of pretend intimacy they performed even when no one was watching. Muscle memory for a relationship that didn't exist. "The Patterson acquisition is hitting snags," Ethan said, his hands finding her waist as she reached up to smooth his hair. "Their board is getting cold feet about the merger terms." "Will you lose the deal?" Madison asked, genuinely concerned. She'd learned more about Sterling Enterprises' business in 3 weeks than she'd ever thought she'd want to know, but Ethan's passion for his work was infectious. He'd spent hours explaining the intricacies of corporate acquisitions to her, and she found herself actually interested in the strategic thinking behind his decisions. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Ethan said, though his voice carried a weariness she hadn't heard before. "Their concerns aren't entirely unfounded. The market has been volatile lately, and they're worried about overextending themselves." Madison studied his face, noting the genuine frustration there. What would losing Patterson mean for Sterling Enterprises? "It would set us back about 2 years on our expansion timeline," Ethan admitted, "and it would give the board ammunition to question my leadership decisions." "The same board that's pressuring you to get married." "The very same." Ethan's hands lingered on her waist, his thumbs tracing small circles that made her skin tingle through the silk. "But let's not talk about work tonight. You look incredible, by the way." "Sophia's work," Madison said, though she couldn't help but smile at the compliment. "Ready to charm the cultural elite into donating obscene amounts of money to the arts?" "Always." Ethan's answering smile was genuine, not the calculated expression he wore for the cameras. "Though I have to admit, these events are significantly more bearable with you there." "Careful, Mr. Sterling," Madison teased, straightening his bow tie unnecessarily. "Someone might think you actually enjoy my company." "Shocking thought," Ethan murmured, but his eyes were warm as they met hers in the mirror. The moment stretched between them, comfortable and dangerous in equal measure. Madison was acutely aware of how close they were standing, how right it felt to be in his arms, and how easy it would be to rise up on her toes and kiss him for real instead of for the cameras. These moments had been happening more frequently lately, times when the line between performance and reality blurred so completely that Madison forgot which side of it she was supposed to be on. Like 2 nights ago, when they'd been watching a movie on the couch and she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder. She'd woken up hours later to find herself covered with a blanket, Ethan still sitting beside her with his laptop, working quietly so as not to disturb her sleep. Or yesterday morning, when she'd been struggling with a particularly difficult campaign pitch, and Ethan had sat with her at the kitchen island, offering suggestions and encouragement until she'd finally cracked the creative problem. The kiss he'd given her when she'd figured it out had felt like celebration, not performance. The sound of her phone buzzing broke the spell. Madison stepped out of Ethan's embrace to check the message, trying to ignore the immediate sense of loss she felt at the broken contact. "Riley wants to know if we're still on for lunch tomorrow," Madison said, scrolling through her messages. "And my mom is asking again when she gets to meet mysterious husband. She's starting to think I made you up." Madison's relationship with her best friend had become increasingly strained over the past 3 weeks. Riley knew something was off. She'd known Madison too long to be completely fooled by the sudden transformation from struggling creative director to Manhattan socialite. But the confidentiality agreement prevented Madison from telling her the truth, and the lies were eating away at their friendship. "What did you tell your mother?" Ethan asked, straightening his cufflinks. "That you're very busy with work and travel, but that we'll arrange something soon." Madison set her phone aside and picked up her clutch. "She's getting suspicious, though. She keeps asking why I haven't brought you home to Kansas yet. She says it's not normal for a newlywed to keep her husband away from her family for so long." The thought of taking Ethan home to Clearwater, Kansas, population 8,000, made Madison's stomach flip. Her parents still lived in the same modest farmhouse where she'd grown up. Her father still worked at the grain elevator, and her mother still taught second grade at the elementary school. They were good, honest people who would see right through any pretense, and her mother would probably try to have a heart-to-heart with Madison about whether she was truly happy. "We should probably plan a trip," Ethan said thoughtfully. "It would look strange if we didn't visit your family eventually. The society reporters are bound to start asking questions about why we haven't done the traditional meet the parents routine." "Maybe after the holidays," Madison said vaguely, hoping something would come up to delay the inevitable. "Madison," Ethan said gently, "are you embarrassed by where you come from?" The question caught her off guard. "No, of course not. I love my family. I'm proud of my roots." "Then what's the problem?" Madison struggled to put her feelings into words. "It's just, you're going to walk into their little farmhouse wearing a suit that costs more than they make in a month, and they're going to know immediately that we don't belong in the same world. They're going to wonder what you could possibly see in their ordinary daughter from Kansas." Ethan stepped closer to her, his expression serious. "First of all, there's nothing ordinary about you. And second, your parents raised an incredible woman who built a successful career through talent and hard work. If they can't see how remarkable you are, then they don't deserve to know